All right, we are going to finish our revolutions today. We're going to talk about the Chinese Communist Revolution. So to learn a little bit more, you've already studied China, so just a quick review. Remember, you have royal Chinese dynasties from the founding with the Shang Dynasty, and they will rule all the way up to 1911. And again, they ruled through the Mandate of Heaven, when that general concept that because you're born the first male, you have to rule, and also that added concept of you rule because you fight and you win against all of your enemies. If you lose, it's because the gods want you to lose, and therefore the other person gets the Mandate of Heaven. So that lasts all the way till 1911, and then in 1912, there's a revolution, but not the one that we're going to discuss today. The 1912 revolution actually institutes a democratic regime, so they get rid of the royal family, and you'll see them electing a president, Sun Yat-sen, and they will attempt to hold power over China, but seeing that there was no longer a royal family, the warlords that had existed since the beginning of Chinese dynasties, they all control their own regions of China. They had been used by the royal families to maintain peace. Now they're trying to get control over China itself. You'll see them banding together in different areas, and you'll wind up with a civil war happening in China. One side is the Communist Party. Now remember, the communist concept had been established in Russia 20 years earlier, and the Chinese people wanted to follow that, those in the Communist Party, and they will fight against the Nationalist Party. And it's actually going to be a very difficult fight between the groups. We'll do a little bit more information on it, but they're going to take a hiatus in World War II. So a hiatus is a break from the fighting because they're all going to band together to fight against the Japanese in that invasion. And then as soon as the war is over, that civil war pops up again, and the communists will officially win. So how do the communists rise to power? So you have two major leaders at the time. You have the Communist Party being led by Mao Zedong, which if any of you have ever traveled to China, you see his picture all over the place. And then the Nationalist Party is led by Chiang Kai-shek, who was a military leader at that time. And both of them have a big stories around them in terms of people believing that they are very strong leaders. And a lot of it comes down to the Long March. So in 1934, the Nationalists, led by Chiang Kai-shek, are going to basically chase the communists out of China. They're going to start in the south and they're going to move northward. And the retreat of the Communist Party to the north of China is called the Long March. They'll see a loss of about 80,000 people. Communists will die during this time period, just trying to survive running from the Nationalist Party, which is how Chiang Kai-shek is seen as the strong leader. Mao Zedong takes part in the Long March, and he survives the Long March, which is a testament to his strength. But it's one of those cases of what would have happened if history was a little bit different, because it's very evident that if they had continued pushing, the Nationalist Party would have won, and they would have eradicated the Communist Party out of China. However, the war hits, Japan invades, and like I said, they take a hiatus. The National Communists stop fighting amongst themselves to push out the Chinese. Sorry, not the Chinese, to push out the Japanese. And the result of that would be, after the war is finished and the Japanese finally leave, that civil war comes back again, but now the communists will push out the nationalists, and they'll actually push them completely out of mainland China to the island of Taiwan. And you get this very interesting concept of what makes a country, because technically there are two Chinas as recognized by the world. The People's Republic of China is what we know as China today. The Republic of China, okay, is what we would call Taiwan. This idea that the government that was in charge of China was forced to leave, and when they set up their new government, that becomes China. And you say, well, that seems very silly because China is China. But prior to your life, and mine, I'm not that old, but there's this long time period between 1949 and the early 1970s where the People's Republic of China is not recognized as a real country. It's not recognized as a sovereign nation. Instead, the government in Taiwan is recognized as the rulers of China. It's not until 1972, when President Nixon visits China, the mainland, that the People's Republic is officially considered a real country and allowed to join in global discussions. Now, Mao Zedong, when he is running China, has this idea of the best way his country could be transformed. And originally, it was about moving China from an agricultural society to a modern industrialized nation, making it a global power. So there's some pros with that, okay? By making sure everyone is going to school for a certain part of time and running the economy, you're going to have increased literacy, so everyone's going to learn how to read and write, like the Romans. But that's only going to go up to 5th grade, so everyone gets to go to elementary school or primary school. After that, it's iffy. There's no longer a landlord or business class, and healthcare is provided for all. Okay. The con is that in order to do that, the government sets up basically a dictatorship, and they're going to violate a lot of human rights and freedoms in order to shift the system. Okay. The programs that they do to do this are called Great Leaps. So in 1958, Mao Zedong organizes the Great Leap Forward. And this was designed to increase the agricultural industrial output, so the amount of goods that can be provided by China. And he does this in a way that just doesn't make sense. He sets up communes, which is a place where everyone shares all goods and housings. When we talk about communes in the U.S., it's usually referencing like the 1970s hippie era, where people would just all go live together and grow their own food and whatnot, and work together. But he sets it up so that the communes are focused on a goal. So you have a commune for food production, you have a commune for steel production, iron production, chair production, like whatever it was that the major crop or factory in your area was, everyone became that commune. Now, the result of that is the opposite of what you want. The goods that are produced are worse than what they were, and the amount that are produced are worse than what they were, because the people who were chosen to fit into those communes were there just based on geographical. It had nothing to do with their skill set. So you have people who had lived their whole lives to be farmers who all of a sudden are being told they need to make chairs. And you have people who had great skill in metalwork who were now told they had to raise potatoes. And the result is just really poor workmanship and people doing the bare minimum to survive. because they've been also forced to move to these communes, some of them living their ancestral homes that have like generation upon generation of their family living there. So you have these poor products, and also you have crop failures, and you have this widespread famine. And the Great Leap Forward is a failure. What's interesting is that Mao Zedong tries to prevent a revolution by having his own revolution. So this is where China kind of stands out. You have a leader who really paid attention to history class and recognized that what he was doing to the people, forcing them to move, forcing them to have jobs that they're not trained to have, and then the people starving, is going to lead to a revolution. I mean, he could have tried to fix those problems to prevent the revolution, but he's going to go a different way, and he's going to hold his own revolution. In 1966, he's going to hold the Cultural Revolution. He's going to make this argument that it's not about what people are doing, it's about what they believe, and that's why things are failing. And he kind of wants to renew people's belief in communism and make society more equitable. And he really worries that the problem is the educated people, the intellectual people, were kind of taking over the area, and they were pushing that concept of revolution. Just like French Revolution, you see the like Robespierre, very famous lawyer, well educated. He's the one who starts the Reign of Terror. So Mao really worries about that. So he tries to prevent what is a normal source of revolution, meaning the educated class. So you see him shutting down schools and universities. 5th grade becomes the average graduation grade for everyone. And he takes all of those young people who were students at the time and really mobilizes them to experience the revolution themselves. And you see him forming the Red Guard. So the Red Guard was students who were following Mao's manifesto on how to recreate the true meaning of communism. And it means you have to speak out against the authority who's telling you what to do. Not Mao, okay? But all those intellectual people, those adults, those ones who keep telling you what to do and how to think and how you're supposed to act, and they don't really know. And he really pushes them to do whatever it is you need to do to make them listen, which for the young folks meant violence. You see them running around with their little red book, which you can still get today, which has the manifesto in it. And you see them attacking government officials and professors, managers, anyone who would be in charge, and yelling about how it's all supposed to be equality, and you actually see them becoming very violent and beating them. And you see this wave in China that we see in other countries of what's called a brain drain, where artists and poets and anyone who would be identified as someone thinking outside the box is either imprisoned and sent to work camps, or they flee the country. And you see Mao basically taking away the education of his country, making it much easier to maintain control. We don't know where that would have gone, because within 10 years, Mao is going to die. And you get a new leader, Deng Xiaoping, and he's going to have a different concept of communism. He's going to go back to the original goal. Let's make China a modern country, and let's make some money. And he has a very famous economic theory, because people argue that him wanting to make money and opening up trade and contacts with Western nations was going to promote capitalism. And his theory was it doesn't matter if a cat is black or white as long as it catches mice. meaning it doesn't matter if your economic policies are capitalist or communist as long as you're making money. And that's where you see that divide that China's still in today. They have communist political processes and ruling, but their economy is really more capitalist. He's going to push for the 4 modernizations. So, and this is actually very, very impressive, and this is why China is a major powerhouse today. He identifies 4 major areas of industry: farming, industry in the sense of manufacturing, science and technology, and military. And he's going to say these are the areas that produce goods that everyone around the world always wants. So he's going to push for a lot of funding into those 4 areas, and he's going to increase privatization, so allowing individuals to own those properties and make their own profit, therefore makes more profit for China. And you see that the economy growing, the standard of living rising, and things are just getting better overall. You do see that gap between the rich and the poor increasing, as does crime and corruption. It's becoming much more capitalistic for the economic standpoint, as I said. But again, politically, still very communist. And you've seen a lot of different push in China to become more free and open when it comes to their political process. That simply isn't happening. You just had this past year, 2019, they decided to remove all term limits for the president. So Xi Jinping can be president basically for the rest of his life if he wants to, which is not democratic. And it's been on a global scale. So again, 1972 is when it's officially recognized as a country, but it comes on the global scene in the late 80s with the very famous Tiananmen Square massacre. So you're starting to get more and more protests. Now that they've been opened up to Western nations, you're getting more protests about civil liberties and rights that are being detained. And in May of 1989, they occupied Tiananmen Square in Beijing, which is just like Times Square. It's this big open space where you have protesters come in, and they've got signs. They've got the Statue of Liberty, and they're saying, you need to listen to us. They are not armed. They are all unarmed protesters. But there's a big mass of them, and they are asked to leave, and they refuse, so they do a sit-in. When the government hears of this, their response is to send in not just military troops, like sending in the National Guard, they're also going to send in tanks. And that's when you get the very famous scene of Tank Man, with that one individual who literally just stood in front of the tanks to stop them coming in. What's important that happens with that is at that time, you had a lot of international reporters in the area, so they were able to witness this and record it, which will then be released for the global community, and people will see what's happening in China, because they really had just seen that economic point of it, where they're willing to trade now, and they're opening up the borders, and they're starting to make money, and it looks really capitalist, but this is clearly a communist regime. You'll see over 3,000 protesters being killed or wounded. Again, unarmed protesters. In this massive movement. And you'll see this global response of watching China more, but China is not going to respond in terms of opening up rights and liberties. You often see more of a crackdown, which is why communism is still existing today in China as the ruling foundation of the government. Okay, so the Chinese Revolution is an interesting one, like I said, because it's the first time you have a leader who really understands why revolutions happen and tries to get out of ahead of it by instituting his own cultural revolution and the results that come with that. So Tank Man's usually very interesting for students to learn about, because you really get this real feel of what was happening in the 80s and 90s in terms of trying to speak out against the Chinese government. So today's assignment is real simple. You're going to watch a 5-minute clip looking back at Tank Man from a reporter who was there at the time, and his view on it. And then there's just one simple question to answer on it. I put it all in a Google form so you'll be able to watch the video and then answer the question and then hit turn in. And as always, email if you have questions, and have a good Memorial Day weekend.